He said he was cold. That was it. 4 simple words, but somehow they pulled me out of bed on a Saturday night and into his tiny, drafty apartment. I didn't even know his name at the time, just that he was shivering on his couch in a hoodie 2 sizes too big, and that he looked like someone who'd rather be anywhere but there. And somehow, I ended up letting him sleep next to me. Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up a bit. I'm Max, by the way, just a regular guy who likes weekend runs, strong coffee, and avoiding unnecessary drama. I work in a bookstore downtown, which means I get my fair share of odd hours and random encounters, but nothing that would prepare me for a night like that. It all started earlier that evening when I was grabbing a late cup of coffee from this little hole-in-the-wall place. The kind of place where the barista knows your name and your usual order. That's where I saw him. The guy who'd eventually be cold enough to crash at my place. He was sitting alone, hunched over a laptop, headphones tangled around his neck, and looking like he hadn't slept in days. I know that look. Been there more times than I care to admit. I wanted to say something, but I didn't. Sometimes it's hard to just walk up to a stranger, even if you want to. Instead, I just watched him from across the room, wondering what story he was living. When I went to pay, he caught my eye and gave me this weak, almost apologetic smile. I smiled back, and that was it. Nothing fancy, but for some reason, it stuck with me. Maybe because he seemed so out of place, or maybe because I was just being nosy. Fast forward a few hours later. I'm home, settling in, when my phone buzzes. It's a text from an unknown number. Hey, can I come over? I'm cold. No name, no explanation, just those 3 words. Cold. I stared at the message, feeling this weird mix of curiosity and concern. Who just texts a stranger to say they're cold? I hesitated, but something about his tone, the way those words felt, made me type back, "Yeah, sure, come on over." When he showed up, I finally got a better look. He looked even smaller in person, like the hoodie was swallowing him whole. His eyes were a little red, and his hair was a mess, but there was something honest about him that made me trust him right away. We sat in my living room for a bit, just talking about nothing and everything. It wasn't the kind of conversation where you spill all your secrets, but there was this quiet comfort, like 2 people who didn't need to force anything. After a while, he looked at me and said, "I don't want to be alone tonight." I told him he didn't have to be. So that's how, on a random Saturday night, I ended up sharing my bed with a guy the first barely knew. And honestly, I wasn't sure if it was just because he was cold, or if it was something else. Something I wasn't ready to name yet. But as I lay there, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing next to me, I realized that sometimes the simplest things, like a text saying, "I'm cold," can change everything. I wasn't sure what I expected that night. Maybe some awkward small talk, a quick nap next to each other, and then he'd be gone come morning. But as we settled under the thin blanket on my couch, something shifted. The initial chill in the room wasn't just from the cold air seeping through the window. It was this quiet space between us, filled with unspoken things. His name, by the way, was Leo. I learned that the next morning, when I woke up to him already awake, scrolling through his phone with a furrowed brow, like he was trying to solve some puzzle in his head. I watched him for a minute, feeling this strange calm wash over me. It was the kind of calm that comes from realizing you're sharing a moment that might actually matter. "So," I said, rubbing the sleep out of my eyes, "how are you feeling? Warm enough? Now?" He looked up, surprised I was awake, and then gave me a small smile. "Yeah, warmer. Thanks to you." That was Leo. Quiet, a bit guarded, but with this subtle warmth that was impossible to miss once you got close. We sat there awkwardly for a moment, neither of us quite sure what to say next. "I didn't expect to end up crashing here," he admitted, running a hand through his messy hair. "I'm usually better at, not letting myself get that cold." I laughed softly. "Yeah, me too. Guess we all have those nights." He nodded, but there was this trace of something behind his eyes, like he was holding back a story he wasn't ready to tell. That was fine by me. Sometimes people just need to be warm without having to explain why. Over the next few days, Leo stuck around. I mean, not like I planned it or anything, it just sort of happened. He'd come over in the mornings, grab a coffee from my place, and disappear for a bit, then show up again in the evenings, often without warning. He wasn't looking for a roommate or anything, just a place to feel a little less cold, emotionally and literally. One evening, we ended up at this little dive bar a few blocks from my apartment. Nothing fancy, just cheap drinks and a jukebox full of songs neither of us recognized. Leo had this way of talking about music that made me want to listen, even when I didn't get it. He told me about bands he loved back home, places he'd been before he ended up here. It wasn't all sunshine. There were some rough patches, some bruised memories. But you're still standing. I told him, after he finished one of those stories that made me want to hug him without knowing if that was okay. He shrugged, a little smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. I have to be, don't I? That night was the first time I noticed how much I liked the way he looked when he laughed. The kind of laugh that starts in the eyes and spreads to the whole face. It caught me off guard because I hadn't really felt that way about someone in a long time. Not like this. Back at my apartment, as we walked up the stairs, the air was thick with something unspoken. I caught a glimpse of him in the hallway mirror, his eyes when he thought I wasn't looking. Vulnerable but open, like he was inviting me in without saying a word. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of rain tapping against the window. Leo was curled up on my couch, wrapped in the same hoodie from that first night, but now it looked less like armor and more like comfort. I made us both coffee and sat down next to him, feeling the quiet hum of a new kind of companionship settling in. "Thanks for letting me stay," he said quietly, fingers tracing the rim of his mug. I shrugged, trying to play it cool, but feeling anything but. "You're welcome. It's nice having you around." He gave me one of those looks again, the kind that makes your heart skip. I think so too. Days turned into weeks, and the coldness that had brought him to my door slowly faded. Not just the physical kind, but the kind that lives deep inside when you feel alone. We talked about dreams and fears, shared playlists, and debated over the dumbest TV shows. It felt easy and real, like friendship with the possibility of something more. One night, as we sat side by side watching old movies, Leo reached out and brushed a stray hair from my forehead. It was such a small gesture, but it hit me harder than any grand confession ever could. I turned to look at him, and for once there was no hesitation in his eyes. "Max," he said softly, "I'm glad I was cold that night. And honestly, so was I." I smiled at him, watching the way the flickering light from the TV caught the soft edges of his face. There was something about that moment, private and quiet, that made everything else fade away. "Glad you were cold too," I said, barely above a whisper. We sat like that for a while, not saying much, just letting the silence fill the spaces between us. It wasn't awkward or tense. It felt easy, like settling into a warm bath after a long day. I realized then that this wasn't just about him needing a place to warm up. It was about both of us finding something we didn't realize we'd been missing. The next morning, I woke up alone in my bedroom, which was a little strange after all the nights Leo had been there. I got up, stretched, and found him sitting on my couch with his laptop, earbuds in, completely absorbed in whatever he was watching. I grabbed some coffee and sat down across from him. "Morning," I said, trying to keep it casual. He looked up, smiled that half-shy smile of his, and pulled out one earbud. "Morning. You sleep okay?" "Better than I expected, actually," I said, taking a sip. "You?" he shrugged. "Same. Feels weird not crashing here, honestly." I raised an eyebrow. "So, what's the plan? You just gonna keep showing up like this?" He laughed, a little embarrassed, and ran a hand through his hair again. "I don't know. I guess I've been avoiding going back to my place. It's complicated." That was the understatement of the year, but I didn't push. Sometimes people need to open up on their own terms, and I wanted him to know I was here when he was ready. Over the next few days, Leo started showing up more regularly, not just in the evenings, but during the day too. Sometimes he'd bring me a sandwich or some random snack he found at the corner store, and other times we'd just hang out in comfortable silence, each lost in our own world, but somehow still connected. One afternoon, we ended up at this little park near my apartment, sitting on a bench under an ancient oak tree. The sun was warm, but the breeze reminded me why he'd said he was cold in the first place. Leo pulled his hoodie tighter around him and looked over at me. "You're really patient, you know that?" he said. I grinned. "Well, I'm trying to be. You're worth it." He looked down, cheeks flushing just a little. I'm not used to people sticking around. Most times, I push them away before they even get close. "Sounds lonely," I said quietly. He nodded. It is, but with you, it feels different. We sat there for a while, watching people stroll by, dogs chasing frisbees, kids laughing. It was ordinary, but to me, it felt special. Like this simple afternoon was a turning point neither of us expected. That night, back at my place, we cooked dinner together. Well, he mostly watched while I butchered the recipe and laughed over our failed attempts. It was the first time I noticed how his eyes crinkled when he laughed, how his hands moved when he talked, animated, but a little nervous. I found myself wanting to get closer, to bridge the space between us. After dinner, we collapsed on the couch, tired and full. Leo leaned his head on my shoulder, and I felt this rush of warmth spread through me. It was comforting and terrifying all at once. "Max?" he whispered. "Yeah? I think I'm scared." "Of what?" I asked, turning so I could see his face. "Of this." He gestured vaguely between us, feeling something again, letting someone in. It's easier to be cold, you know. Easier to keep people at a distance. I nodded slowly. "Yeah, I get it, but maybe sometimes being cold isn't the answer." He looked up at me, searching my eyes. Maybe. We sat there in the quiet, the city noise humming outside, and I realized that this, him, me, the unspoken between us, was something fragile, something worth holding on to carefully. In the days that followed, I found myself paying more attention to the little things, how he'd catch my hand by accident and not pull away, how he'd share bits of his past in fragments, how he looked at me when he thought I wasn't watching. One night, after a late movie marathon, he turned to me and said, "Can I ask you something?" "Shoot." "Why did you let me stay that night? When I texted you out of the blue?" I thought about it for a second. "Honestly? Because you seemed like you needed it?" Not just the warmth, but a place to be safe for a little while. And maybe because I was curious. Maybe because something about you didn't feel like a stranger. He smiled softly, eyes shining in the dim light. "I'm glad you did." That moment felt like a quiet promise between us. Not a declaration or a grand gesture, just a shared understanding. Weeks later, the night air wasn't so cold anymore, but sometimes, when I caught Leo shivering just a little, I'd pull him closer, remind him that he didn't have to be cold anymore. Not really, because sometimes warmth comes from the most unexpected places, and sometimes it's more than just a hoodie or a blanket. It's a person, someone who stays, even when it's easier to walk away. I don't know where this is going yet. Hell, I'm still figuring it out myself. But one thing's for sure, when he said he was cold that night, I never imagined it would lead to this. Tonight's filled with quiet conversations, stolen smiles, and a kind of closeness that sneaks up on you when you least expect it. And honestly, I'm glad I answered that text. Because sometimes the simplest words, like "I'm cold," can open the door to something you didn't even know you were looking for. It was about a month after that first night when things started to feel like they were shifting, you know? Not in a dramatic, overnight kind of way, but slowly, almost imperceptibly. One evening, Leo and I were sitting on my balcony, the city lights painting a soft glow around us. We'd grabbed some takeout, nothing fancy, just noodles and dumplings from the place down the street, and we're sharing the kind of comfortable silence that comes after you've talked yourself hoarse. I had my arm draped over the back of the chair, and without really thinking, I shifted it so my hand was just grazing his knee. He didn't pull away. Instead, he glanced at me, eyes catching the street lamp's light, and for a second I thought he might say something. But he just smiled, quiet but genuine. "You know," he said finally, breaking the silence, "I never really ask what you do when you're not rescuing guys who text you because they're cold." I laughed, shaking my head. Sounds like a superhero origin story, but nah, I'm just some guy who works at a bookstore, eats too much pizza, and occasionally goes for way too early runs. He raised an eyebrow. "Runs? You don't sound like the pizza kind of guy. Balance, my friend." "Gotta make room for both." I nudged him playfully. Leo chuckled, the sound low and warm, and that's when I felt this little jolt, like the air between us had changed just a bit. I looked over at him and noticed how the streetlight caught the softness in his eyes, the kind that only shows up when someone's feeling safe. There was a pause, and then he said, "I'm sorry if I'm being weird. I'm just not used to this. to people being kind without asking for anything. I turned so I was fully facing him, catching his gaze. You're not weird. And kindness isn't a transaction. Sometimes it's just kindness. He smiled, that small, shy smile I was starting to love. Thanks, Max. It wasn't a big moment or anything, no grand gestures or confessions. Just two guys sitting on a balcony, sharing noodles and a kind of quiet understanding that felt far more important than words. A few nights later, we were watching some terrible sci-fi movie, because really, who can resist bad special effects and cheesy one-liners, when Leo's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then looked over at me with a flicker of hesitation. I should probably answer this, he said. I didn't want to pry, but something in his voice made me lean a little closer. Is it someone you don't want to talk to? He bit his lip and nodded. Sort of. It's complicated. Without pushing, I just said, you don't have to talk about it, but I'm here if you want to. He looked at me for a long moment, then sighed. It's just my ex. We had a messy breakup, and they've been trying to reach me. I wasn't expecting it tonight. I nodded slowly, understanding more than I let on. Breakups are messy. Leo swallowed hard and then, after a beat, put his phone face down on the coffee table. I'm scared, Max. Scared they'll pull me back into something toxic. Scared of what I might lose if I let that happen. I reached out and took his hand, fingers intertwining naturally, no hesitation. Then hold on to what's good. Hold on to what's real. His eyes met mine, and in that look I saw something fragile, but also something hopeful. I squeezed his hand gently. You're not alone. That night, as we fell asleep side by side on my couch, I realized how much I wanted to be the person who helped him heal, the person who stayed when everything else felt like it was falling apart. The next day, Leo barely said a word, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he avoided his phone. So after work, I invited him to go for a walk, just to clear our heads. We ended up at the park again, sitting beneath that same oak tree where we'd shared that afternoon months ago. He finally opened up, telling me bits and pieces of what happened, how the relationship started great but became controlling, how he felt trapped and alone, even when surrounded by people. Hearing him, I felt this mix of sadness and admiration for how far he'd come. I didn't think I could get out, he said softly, eyes fixed on the ground. But I did, with a lot of help. And you're still here, I said, nudging him gently. Here, with me. Leo looked up, a small smile tugging at his lips. Yeah, here. That night, when we got back to my place, I made us tea, and we sat close on the couch, shoulders touching. The silence between us wasn't empty anymore. It was full of everything we were slowly building. Trust, hope, maybe even something more. Days turned into weeks, and the ex stopped calling. Not because Leo blocked them, but because he stopped answering. Instead, he answered me with texts, calls, and sometimes just a knock on my door. One night, as we were sharing a late dinner, Leo reached across the table and took my hand. It was a small gesture, but it felt monumental. I looked into his eyes, searching for what I hoped was there. Max, he said quietly, thank you for being here, for not running away. I squeezed his hand back. I'm not going anywhere. Then he smiled, the kind of smile that makes you feel like you're exactly where you're supposed to be. And honestly, I think that's when I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, letting a guy sleep next to me because he was cold was the best decision I ever made. Because sometimes warmth isn't about blankets or hoodies. It's about the people who choose to stay, even when the world feels cold as hell. There was an easy rhythm to the nights we spent together after that, the kind of rhythm where minutes stretch into hours and you forget about the world outside. One evening, a week or so after that dinner, we found ourselves sprawled across my couch, half watching a documentary about some obscure artist neither of us cared about, when Leo did something that caught me completely off guard. He shifted so he was facing me, his elbow resting on the armrest, eyes locked on mine with an intensity that made my heart thump a little harder. Max, he said, voice low, can I ask you something? I blinked, suddenly nervous. Sure, shoot. He hesitated like he was weighing whether or not to say it. then finally breathed out. "What are we doing?" Us. The question hit me like a splash of cold water because, honestly, I'd been avoiding it myself. We'd fallen into this comfortable space between friendship and something more, but neither of us had named it. I looked at him, searching for the right words that wouldn't freak him out. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I want to find out. With you." He smiled that shy smile, the one that makes your chest tighten. "Me too." That night, we talked more than we had in weeks, about fears, about hopes, about what it means to be seen and accepted. It wasn't perfect. In fact, it was messy and a little scary, but it was real. And when I finally pulled him close, letting my hand rest on his back, it felt like coming home. Days later, something changed. Leo stopped hanging around just in the evenings, or dropping by here and there. He started staying over regularly, leaving a few things at my place, making little adjustments like rearranging my bookshelf. He insisted it made more sense his way, and leaving behind his favorite mug on the counter. It was subtle but meaningful, like we were blending our lives, piece by piece. One Saturday morning, I woke to find him standing in the kitchen, making coffee in that quiet way he had. The sunlight was pouring in through the window, casting a glow around him that made my heart skip. "You make the best coffee," I said, pulling myself up from the couch. He looked over, grinning. "Well, I've been practicing." We moved to the small dining table, sitting close enough that our knees touched. I reached out and brushed a loose strand of hair from his forehead. "I'm glad you're here," I said softly. "Me too," he replied. "I didn't think I could feel like this again." "What? Warm?" I teased. He laughed, the sound light and free. "Yeah, warm." That afternoon, we took a walk through the neighborhood, the kind of aimless wandering that lets your thoughts catch up with you. We stopped at a tiny record store and ended up flipping through vinyl, debating over music and sharing stories about songs that meant something to us. There was a moment when he looked at me, eyes shining, and said, "I never thought I'd find someone who listens." I squeezed his hand. "I'm all ears." As the weeks went on, the boundary between yours and mine blurred until it didn't matter anymore. Leo started talking about his job, his dreams, the small stuff he used to keep locked away. I watched him open up like a flower blooming after a long winter, and it made me feel like the luckiest guy alive. But, like any story worth telling, it wasn't without its moments of doubt. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, I caught Leo staring out the window, a storm of thoughts clearly raging behind his eyes. "What's on your mind?" I asked gently. He sighed and turned to me, eyes tired but honest. "I'm scared. Scared that it won't last, that I'll mess it up, that I'm not enough." I pulled him into a hug, holding him tight. "Hey, listen to me. You're more than enough. We're in this together. We'll figure it out." He rested his head on my chest, and I felt the steady beating of his heart. "Thank you, Max, for sticking around, for believing." I kissed the top of his head. "Always." Not long after that, we officially decided to be us, whatever that meant, which, in our case, was really just a promise to keep showing up for each other. It wasn't a dramatic moment, no grand announcements or dramatic confessions. Just two guys sitting on a messy couch, holding hands, and deciding to try. One night, Leo surprised me by cooking dinner. He'd gotten a cookbook from the library and was determined to make something edible. The kitchen became a chaotic mess of spilled sauce and burnt edges, but the way he laughed through it all made me realize how much I cherished these little imperfect moments. As we ate, he reached across the table and took my hand. "I never expected this," he said, "to find someone who sees me." I squeezed his hand. "I see you, Leo. All of you." He smiled, a little shy, but full of something I recognized as hope. Months passed, and with each day, we built something that felt solid. A patchwork of trust, laughter, late-night talks, and quiet mornings. The cold that had started it all was a distant memory, replaced by something warmer and more real. But love, as I learned, isn't a straight line. There were days when shadows from Leo's past crept in, when doubts bubbled up, and when the fear of losing what we had made both of us hold back. Yet every time, we found our way back to each other. One rainy afternoon, as we sat on the couch wrapped in a blanket, Leo looked at me and said, "Max, do you ever think about the night I showed up here because I was cold?" "All the time," I admitted. He smiled softly. "Me too. That night was the beginning of everything." I nodded. "It was. And I'm glad you were cold." He leaned into me, resting his head on my shoulder. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to say anything else. Because sometimes, the best stories are told in silences shared between two people who finally found warmth in each other. The months that followed felt like a slow unfolding, a kind of gentle, steady warmth that settled deep into my bones. Leo and I moved beyond the shaky beginnings, past the cautious silences and unspoken fears, into something that felt real and steady. Not perfect, but ours. One evening, not long ago, we were sitting on my balcony again. The city lights twinkled below, and the air was crisp but no longer biting. Leo had his head on my shoulder, and I was tracing lazy circles on his hand. We didn't need to talk about the future or the past. We just existed in that moment, the kind of peaceful quiet that feels like home. "I'm really glad I sent that text," Leo said softly, breaking the silence. I smiled, looking out at the skyline. "Yeah, me too." He shifted to face me, eyes searching mine. "You know, I was scared back then, not just of the cold, but of trust, of letting someone in. But now," he hesitated, then smiled. "Now it feels like I'm finally warm." There it was, the simple truth that had pulled us together. Two people who were once cold, who found something worth holding on to in each other. I reached up and tucked a loose strand of hair behind his ear. "You don't have to be scared anymore. I'm not going anywhere." He laughed softly, that familiar sound that always made my heart skip. "Good, because I'm not either." We leaned into each other, the world fading away until all that mattered was the steady rhythm of two hearts learning how to beat as one. In that quiet, unassuming moment, everything felt right, like the kind of love that doesn't need fireworks or grand declarations, just the simple, honest choice to stay. And honestly, I think that's the kind of warmth worth chasing. Because sometimes, the coldest nights lead you to the people who make you feel the most alive.